Video games and television. Mostly considered to be completely different media with their unique dispositions, affordances, and positions in the entertainment industry, these two most interactive media, however, are increasingly converging and intersecting. Consider the Netflix interactive stories and the full-motion video games by Wales Interactive, and you might wonder why is one considered an on-demand TV program while the other a video game. Both are fully live-action, prescripted stories with branching storylines. Here I'll look at the differences of the television and video game media, particularly in their affordances of emotion. First, let me explain why did I just call them the most interactive media. There are attributes that we associate with interactive storytelling, whatever made this phrase conjure up in your mind, but which are integral to narrative in general. These attributes would be discussed under the words like agency, immersion, or engagement. You'd hear such words commonly discussed in relation to video games, and so I'm going to compare their use in television and video game scholarship and among the public. The interactivity of video games is a marketing phrase more than a description of the medium's affordances, because actually all stories are by nature interactive. They are so because stories are meant to provoke a reaction, that is, provoke thought and emotion. Emotion is what differentiates a story from a report of fictional events. Even if hesitant to see emotion as a primal objective of stories, it is so in at least some screen texts and particularly some genres. The TV series The Midnight Club is a lot about emotion. Genre-wise, it crosses drama, comedy and horror, which are all body genres, so they trigger a bodily reaction as a result of emotion. Although The Midnight Club plays with a very serious topic, it takes place in a hospice for children. Emotion here does not serve any practical ends. It is there for the pleasure of experiencing emotion. The video game Dead Dragon Cancer, which covers a similar issue, might have this kind of agenda of aimed emotion. The game was made by parents who lost their child to brain tumor. Making the game, they were capturing what was their son like, and what emotions did they and the people around them go through in this difficult and painful, but sometimes also beautiful process. The game therefore connects ideas of cancer, loss, parenting or hope with particular and complex emotions, which it conveys to the player. And while this is achieved with common tools like color, music, composition, plot twists or characters as devices of empathy, it is also enhanced by the pace, which is controlled by the player and fits their emotional processing, and by the intimate storytelling with the illusion of the presence of self and of personal connection with the real people who made the game and inspired their in-game character representations.
And could my soul stranded on this blue raft, awash in a sea of stars, ice, and dust, matter enough to him to turn his hand in mercy?
So while we might hear the word interactivity connected to video games only, with the now more common exception of so-called interactive cinema like Netflix Interactive, it is not where interactivity originates. Television assumes this kind of emotional interaction at the very least, and particularly the now prominent so-called quality television uses transmedia storytelling and often prompts the viewer to decode or solve a story out of collected pieces of narrative. Oftentimes the narrative is not complete or laid out in the most predictable way. It is not necessary for the viewer to extract secret information hidden in the mise-en-scène or in between the lines of dialogue in order to enjoy and understand the program. In fact, just as it is not necessary to follow the threads of various backstories in video games like The Witcher or even Soma, but in both these cases the viewer or player is rewarded for putting in the effort, and the action of identifying such extra narrative elements should be enjoyable. Here I come across another of the video game buzzwords in television context, since this gives the viewer agency to find and enjoy the narrative elements they choose, and to create their own meanings. In the end, this is the very same agency that most video games provide story-wise, because video game narratives are also prescripted, and branching storylines that offer a sense of choice still only give the player the agency to find and enjoy the narrative elements they choose. This sort of narrative is one that Henry Jenkins identifies in Videogame as embedded storytelling. He examines it as a mode of storytelling used in video games, but it is the same embedded story which is used in quality television. That is, narrative elements are dispersed in the story world to be collected and analyzed by the narrator. And so I ask, what does make the video game medium different and unique, if not immersion, interactivity, or agency? Let me introduce you to Presentable Liberty, a game that could help understand the affordances of the video game medium. The Menagerie series and its second game, Presentable Liberty, exemplifies a level of self-awareness of its own medium. The interesting thing about its story, presented in the form of a video game, is the lack of its ludic qualities. Remember the example in the introduction, full-motion video games and Netflix Interactive. One is seen as a game, the other is not. When described as a video game, the expectation is to be able to play, to be active. But instead, Presentable Liberty locks the player up in a prison cell and doesn't allow him to do anything but wait, and eventually read letters sent by never-seen characters. It makes the player focus on what is present, as opposed to many things that aren't. This emphasizes the presented story because that's the only thing that can be engaged with. It's not just about that, though. The waiting that Presentable Liberty seems to be so focused on is a time to be filled with the player's thoughts, intentions, and emotions. The game lasts only about an hour, but it can't be saved, so the only way to play it is in one take. The only way to get to the end is to wait and to let the emotions brew in between the game's interferences. And so I might be frustrated, bored, confused, and I might wonder if the rest of the game will be just like this. I might wonder if it's worth playing. I might also wonder, as the game would prefer me to, about the story, what is happening in the world outside of myself. An impactful story presupposes a world in which it takes place. When I look at the tiny window that's just high enough to obscure any real view, I assume there to be a world, despite never seeing one. According to the possible world theory, this is what allows the narrator to experience a narrative as immersive, and it contributes to their emotional engagement. Now, I'm aware that Presentable Liberty reaches this level of emotional engagement simply because it's an extremely low-budget game made by a single indie creator. But that is exactly why I'm talking about this game. The potential of possible worlds and narrative through the restriction of agency is an affordance of video games that is rarely used intentionally. The expectation of a particular kind of agency in video games allows this unique handling of agency. If video game offers newer and wider narrative possibilities, does it mean that the relevance and popularity of older and supposedly more passive media, like television, will decline as video game storytelling becomes more advanced and confident? As mentioned, transmedia and quality television are the trend today, and I described how is that similar to video game and its interaction. Then I explained what unique emotional interactivity video game offers. Now, let's explore what does television offer. In Westworld, something about the story can be learned from analyzing the narrative structure of the first season, more precisely from analyzing the order of events. The androids in the show have a perfect memory. When they remember something, they remember it with all detail, which is why the narrative order of the season is not in chronology. Here I'm watching the present unfold, but then if an android remembers something in the past, and I'm watching a flashback, there is no visual distinction between the past and the present, because for the android, memory is just as detailed as the present reality.
Just another memory.
Where are we?
We're here. Together.
And when are we? It's like I'm trapped in a dream or a memory from a life long ago. One minute I'm here with you and the next.
Noticing and pondering this gives me access to extra piece of information about the nature of the androids and provides me with a moment of gratification from having realized this towards the end of the season. And it's all thanks to editing and controlled pace, a strong trait of television. Similar approach to story order is taken by the video game Beyond Two Souls, but the unfocused nature of the medium causes further confusion when piecing together the narrative. In Beyond Two Souls, we can experience the story out of order as Jodie is remembering what happened to her and retelling her story in retrospect. But not only does this unnatural narrative structure not serve any extra exposition about the character, but also because the pace of the story otherwise depends on the player, as does their emotional experience of the game, the disjointed, out-of-order pieces of the story don't create as much of a coherent picture and don't have as much of an emotional impact as they do in Westworld, where the editors know exactly what they're doing even as they're messing around with time. So the kind of immersion that video games offer indisposes them to use time in an unnatural way. The strength and the immersion of video games lies in a sort of natural approach to time that is real-time storytelling. This is described by Jenkins and then many others as emergent storytelling. It is a natural way to experience a story. It is how we experience real events before they get transformed into stories by being recounted. The player ought to live through all the events, one at a time, which creates a bricolage of the story in the end. Just by time spent in the proximity to characters and landscapes, I may assume a relationship to them. While games don't usually do much without the player's consent, that is, time doesn't objectively pass, but is dependent on the player's actions, it nevertheless relies on the illusion of time passing. This is represented firstly by moments of perseverance after a period of turmoil. The moment when I'm free to walk out of my prison cell at the end of Presentable Liberty would not be half as significant were it not desired for a long time. Secondly, the way in which characters interact with the avatar assumes time spent in the story world, because they are not interacting with the player directly, but with the avatar that represents them, who is native to the story world, and who can be assumed to have lived there for a time. Video game is its own medium. It is a pity video games keep restricting themselves to narrative tools that were developed for older media like television and film. While video game possesses aspects of these older media because it continues the bardic storytelling legacy, it also offers unique affordances like restricted agency, story through play, or new forms of empathic relations, and allows for new uses of time and space. Branching storylines kind of story is a natural development of the kind of television we have today, that is interactive in new ways, that is transmedial, and that is participatory. Such storytelling should be admitted to television and not be seen as a video game attribute or strength. So personally, I would consider not only Netflix Interactive, but also the full-motion video stories as a television program. It is not like video games don't have anything better going for it, as I have said more than enough. The ultimate mode of storytelling in video games is emergent storytelling, which offers a wide range of emotional expression through its personal involvement of the player, and because it only tells a story and conveys emotion insofar as the player opens themselves up to it and desires it so. Television is better at complex stories, playing around with time, mise-en-scène, and composition, in other words, at embedded storytelling, while video game is better with complex emotion, although paradoxically conveying such a thing means giving up control over it.